Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome back, listeners. Today we're going deep, really deep, into Donald Trump's relationship with Russia. We're talking about a story that goes way back, like decades back, starting with his early business deals and running right through his current second term as president. We've got a lot of ground to cover, drawing from a bunch of sources, but we'll be focusing especially on the work of investigative journalist Craig Unger, particularly his books House of Trump, House of Putin, and American Compromat. Buckle up, folks, because this deep dive is going to uncover some truly fascinating connections.
Fascinating is an understatement, I'd say.
To give you a taste, did you know that Trump's very first trip to Moscow, back in 1987, was probably orchestrated by the KGB?
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
And then there's the whole thing about Russian oligarchs pouring money into his real estate ventures when he was facing financial trouble in the 90s. We're talking serious money flowing through all these anonymous shell companies. It's a tangled web, for sure.
Oh, it definitely raises some eyebrows.
We're going to untangle it piece by piece, right here, right now. So let's rewind the clock back to 1987. Donald Trump, young and ambitious, makes his first trip to Moscow. And it wasn't just a random vacation, was it?
Not at all. This was a carefully orchestrated visit, very likely arranged by the KGB.
The KGB, during the Cold War, they were actively seeking to cultivate relationships with Western businessmen, aren't they?
They were. They saw these individuals, like Trump, as potential assets, people they could potentially use to their advantage in the future.
And Trump fit the bill, I suppose. Successful, ambitious, and perhaps a little susceptible to flattery.
Perhaps. What's interesting is what happened after Trump returned to the U.S. He started taking out these full-page newspaper ads.
Yeah, those ads were pretty strange.
They weren't just your typical real estate promotions. He was criticizing U.S. foreign policy, echoing Soviet talking points, especially on nuclear disarmament.
It was almost like he was aligning himself with Soviet interests.
Exactly. That's what raised eyebrows back then. People were wondering whether his Moscow trip had influenced his views or if, he was susceptible to some kind of external manipulation even then.
It's a pattern we see throughout his career, isn't it?
It does seem that way, doesn't it? And it wasn't just the KGB that was interested in Trump. Czechoslovakian intelligence was keeping tabs on him, too.
Czechoslovakian intelligence. Now, why would they be interested in a New York real estate developer?
Through his then-wife, Ivana, she had family ties to Communist Party officials in Czechoslovakia.
So they were using her as a way to gather intelligence on Trump.
They were looking for his ambitions, vulnerabilities, anything they could potentially exploit. It wasn't just about keeping tabs, it was about actively gathering intelligence.
It's chilling, isn't it, to think that multiple intelligence agencies were interested in Trump all the way back in the 1980s. It paints a picture of a long-term strategy, a plan to cultivate him, perhaps.
A long game, indeed. And this interest, it continued for decades.
And it becomes even more significant when we look at his financial dealings in the 1990s, right?
Right. This is where things get really intriguing. By the early 1990s, Trump's businesses were struggling. He was facing huge financial hurdles, desperately needed cash. And that's when Russian investors stepped in, pumping money into his properties, especially Trump Tower in New York.
A lifeline, in a sense.
It was. But this wasn't just a few Russian individuals investing in real estate. We're talking about a huge influx of Russian money flowing into Trump's businesses.
And the way it was done, it's what really raises red flags, doesn't it?
It does. They used these anonymous shell companies. It made it incredibly difficult to trace the origin of the funds.
Classic tactic for money laundering, isn't it? Obscuring the source of the money.
Absolutely. That's when Felix Sater enters the picture.
Ah, Felix Sater. Tell us about him.
He was deeply involved with the Bayrock Group, a real estate firm with direct ties to Russian oligarchs. And Sater himself, well, he had quite the past. Convicted felon, links to organized crime, and get this, Russian intelligence.
He was the one who connected Trump with those Russian investors, wasn't he?
He was. He played a key role in financing several Trump projects, including the Trump Soho Hotel.
And then there's that email Sater sent, claiming he and Trump would use Russian money to help get Trump into the White House.
Bold move. Audacious, even.
It's chilling to think about, isn't it? Using Russian financing for political gain. It lays bare the depths of their financial entanglement.
It certainly does. And this reliance on Russian capital, it didn't end there. It continued throughout the 2000s, became even more crucial when U.S. banks were hesitant to lend to Trump after his multiple bankruptcies.
Remember that statement from Eric Trump in 2014? He said they had all the funding they needed from Russia.
Very revealing, that statement. It shows just how deeply reliant the Trump organization had become on foreign sources of capital.
And not just any foreign capital, but Russian capital. Capital that came with strings attached.
Precisely. And that's the key point to understand here. Russian intelligence, they're known for cultivating financial dependencies. It's a way to gain leverage over individuals.
They don't necessarily need explicit agreements or quid pro quo arrangements?
Nope. The mere existence of this financial reliance can create a sense of obligation, of pressure. It's a powerful tool.
Which brings us to the concept of compromat.
The heart of the matter, it's a Russian word, refers to compromising material, information or evidence that can be used to blackmail someone, damage their reputation.
A classic Russian intelligence tactic.
Tried and true. Compromat can take many forms. It would be financial entanglements, personal scandals, even manipulated business deals, anything that can be used as leverage.
And there have been persistent rumors, intelligence reports, suggesting that Russia might possess compromat on Trump.
That's right. The most famous example, of course, is the Steele dossier.
That dossier, compiled by a former British intelligence officer, alleges that Russia has compromising information on Trump.
It's been the subject of intense debate. Some details have been corroborated, others remain unverified.
But the fact that such allegations exist, and they align with known Russian intelligence tactics, creates a cloud of suspicion, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Even if we haven't seen concrete evidence of specific compromat, the suggestion alone can cast a shadow and potentially influence someone's actions.
And then there's Trump's consistent deference to Putin, which is puzzling, to say the least.
Puzzling indeed. Previous U.S. presidents took a hard line against Russia, but Trump has repeatedly downplayed their actions, avoided criticizing Putin, even sided with him over his own intelligence agencies.
It raises serious questions about his motivations. Why this deference to Putin?
There are a few theories floating around. Some say it's genuine admiration for Putin's strongman leadership style.
Others say it's fear. Perhaps Trump believes Russia has something on him and he's trying to avoid provoking them.
Or it could be a combination of factors. We may never know for sure. But this deference has had a real impact on U.S.-Russia relations, created unease within the intelligence community. It's something we need to examine closely. It's a pattern that's hard to ignore, wouldn't you say? This deference to Putin has been a constant throughout Trump's presidency.
And it takes us right into the heart of one of the most significant events in recent history, the 2016 U.S. presidential election. An election that, as we know, was heavily influenced by Russian interference.
That's right. And we're not talking about a single isolated incident here. We're talking about a coordinated, multifaceted campaign orchestrated by Russia with the specific goal of influencing the election's outcome.
They really went all out, didn't they? Hacking, leaking emails, spreading disinformation through social media, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. They hacked into the Democratic National Committee. They hacked into Hillary Clinton's campaign. Then they leaked those stolen emails through WikiLeaks. And to top it all off, they used social media platforms to spread disinformation like wildfire.
It was a pretty sophisticated operation, wouldn't you say?
Without a doubt. And it was unprecedented in its scale and sophistication. Their objective was clear: disrupt the electoral process, sow discord among the American public, and ultimately tip the scales in favor of Trump.
And adding fuel to the fire, so to speak, were the connections between key figures in Trump's campaign and Russia.
Oh, absolutely. We can't forget about those. Paul Manafort, Donald Trump Jr., Michael Flynn, Roger Stone. These are just a few of the names that immediately come to mind. Their actions and interactions with Russian operatives during the campaign raised very serious concerns about possible collusion.
Remember that meeting at Trump Hour in June 2016? The one with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, and that Russian lawyer promising dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Hard to forget that one. The emails about that meeting were quite revealing. Trump Jr. clearly expressed his eagerness for the information, even saying, "If it's what you say, I love it."
While that meeting in itself might not be definitive proof of a criminal conspiracy, it certainly showed a willingness on the part of the Trump campaign to engage with Russia and possibly even benefit from their interference in the election.
Definitely. Then, of course, we have the Mueller Report, which was the culmination of a 2-year investigation led by special counsel Robert Mueller. It was a pivotal moment in this whole saga.
What a roller coaster that was. The report's findings were complex, to say the least.
They were. It didn't establish a criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, that much is true. But it did document extensive contacts between campaign officials and Russian operatives. Plus, it highlighted numerous instances that Trump appeared to try to obstruct the investigation.
Mueller was very careful with his wording, wasn't he? He specifically stated that if his team had been confident that Trump didn't obstruct justice, they would have said so.
Exactly. He left that door open, so to speak. Ultimately, the report left many questions unanswered, but it undeniably painted a concerning picture of a campaign entangled with a foreign power that was actively trying to sway the election.
It's important to acknowledge that there are alternative explanations for Trump's pro-Russian stance. explanations that go beyond collusion or compromat.
Yes, of course. There are other perspectives to consider. Some argue that his approach to Russia is simply a manifestation of his America First foreign policy.
They believe that he genuinely thinks engaging with Russia diplomatically is in America's best interest, and that he views NATO as an outdated institution.
Right. Others point to his history of business dealings with Russian oligarchs. They suggest that his affinity for Russia is rooted in financial motivations. Perhaps he's trying to protect his business interests, or maybe he's hoping to secure lucrative deals in the future.
And then there's his deep distrust of the U.S. intelligence community, which he's criticized time and time again. He might genuinely believe that they're exaggerating the threat from Russia, or even fabricating evidence to undermine his presidency.
It's certainly possible. But even considering those alternative explanations, the sheer volume of evidence pointing to Russian influence on Trump, both financially and politically, is difficult to ignore.
It's a complex story with many layers, and it's crucial to consider all the different perspectives and carefully weigh the evidence when forming our own conclusions.
Absolutely. Now, moving into Trump's second term, we see how this relationship with Russia continues to shape the geopolitical landscape. And certain cabinet appointments he's made, particularly those involving individuals with ties to Russia, have fueled considerable concern.
Two appointments in particular stand out: Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence and Pam Bondi as Attorney General. Both have taken actions that seem to benefit Russia, and their nominations were met with significant opposition.
Let's start with Tulsi Gabbard. Her appointment as Director of National Intelligence was controversial from the get-go. Remember, this is the person responsible for overseeing all 18 U.S. intelligence agencies. And Gabbard had a history of foreign policy positions that often seemed to align with Russian interests.
She was a vocal critic of NATO expansion, arguing that it provoked Russia unnecessarily. And she even met with Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, a key Russian ally, back in 2017.
Those actions definitely raised concerns about her judgment and whether she'd truly prioritize U.S. interests over those of Russia. And to add to the apprehension, she had no prior experience in the intelligence community.
That's right, this was her first intelligence role, which made her ability to effectively lead such a critical agency questionable, to say the least.
Now, let's shift our focus to Pam Bondi, the current Attorney General. One of her first moves was to dismantle Task Force Kleptocapture.
That task force was created to enforce sanctions on Russian oligarchs following the invasion of Ukraine. Disbanding it was a significant victory for Russia, wouldn't you say?
It was. It relieved the pressure on the Russian elite, making it potentially easier for them to move their assets around more freely. Bondi then shifted the focus to combating drug cartels and transnational criminal organizations.
On the surface, that might seem like a reasonable change. But critics argue that it's a deliberate attempt to deflect attention away from Russian financial crimes.
It's a perspective worth considering. These appointments, along with other actions taken by the Trump administration, have fostered a sense of unease among U.S. allies and within the intelligence community. There's a growing perception that Trump is prioritizing Russian interests over those of the United States and its allies.
And to fully grasp the geopolitical implications of Trump's relationship with Russia, we have to revisit a crucial moment during his first term, the 2018 Helsinki summit. That meeting between Trump and Putin sent shockwaves around the world.
It was a defining moment for sure. What was truly astonishing was Trump's public siding with Putin over U.S. intelligence agencies on the issue of Russian interference in the 2016 election.
He essentially dismissed the findings of his own intelligence community and accepted Putin's denials.
It was a major diplomatic blunder, seen by many as a stark display of his deference to the Russian leader. Beyond Helsinki, Trump has taken other actions during his time in office that have benefited Russia, often at the expense of U.S. interests and alliances.
Like when he withdrew the U.S. from the INF Treaty, a landmark arms control agreement that had been in place for over 3 decades. That move gave Russia a lot more strategic freedom and was widely condemned by U.S. allies in Europe.
And then there was his decision to reduce the U.S. military presence in Germany, which weakened NATO's posture in Eastern Europe.
And throughout his presidency, he's consistently downplayed Russian cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, even when presented with clear evidence from U.S. intelligence agencies.
It's a pattern that's hard to miss, and these actions have contributed to a perception that Trump is either unwilling or unable to stand up to Russia. And that perception has only emboldened Putin on the world stage.
Now, as Trump enters his second term, these concerns have only intensified. His approach to Russia is a drastic departure from traditional U.S. foreign policy, and his actions continue to raise questions about his true motivations.
His ongoing peace negotiations over the conflict in Ukraine are a prime example of this.
That proposed peace plan has stirred up quite a bit of controversy.
To say the least, many believe that it would reward Russian aggression and ultimately undermine Ukraine's sovereignty.
The plan calls for a ceasefire along the current battle lines, which would solidify Russia's control over the occupied Ukrainian territory.
It also requires Ukraine to abandon its aspirations of joining NATO, a key Russian demand that would leave Ukraine extremely vulnerable to further pressure from Russia.
But perhaps the most contentious element of the plan is the requirement for Ukraine to pay the U.S. 50% of its revenue from natural resources, oil, gas, minerals, as a kind of repayment for past aid.
That stipulation has been widely condemned as exploitative, a blatant prioritization of U.S. financial interests over the well-being of the Ukrainian people.
And what's particularly alarming is that this peace plan was negotiated without involving Ukraine or European allies. This exclusion of key stakeholders raises serious doubts about Trump's commitment to international cooperation and his understanding of the complexities of the conflict in Ukraine.
The global reaction to this peace plan has been overwhelmingly negative. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vehemently rejected it, calling it a betrayal of Ukrainian sovereignty. European leaders have expressed deep concerns, arguing that it rewards Russian aggression and undermines the security architecture of Europe.
Russia, of course, has a different view. They've praised the plan, seen it as a diplomatic victory that legitimizes their actions in Ukraine.
It's a clear illustration of how Trump's relationship with Russia continues to shape U.S. foreign policy in his second term.
It's a relationship shrouded in secrecy, marked by financial entanglements, political maneuvering, and a series of actions that have raised serious concerns about whose interests are truly being served.
It's a complex, evolving story with far-reaching implications for the future of U.S.-Russia relations, the global balance of power, and the very principles of democracy and international order.
As we continue to delve into this intricate web, it's crucial to keep asking critical questions, scrutinize the evidence, and strive for a comprehensive understanding of the forces at play.
It really is a story with so many twists and turns, a real head-scratcher at times.
We've certainly journeyed through a lot in our exploration of Donald Trump's relationship with Russia, from those early encounters with Russian intelligence way back when to this current and quite controversial Ukraine peace plan. It's a story packed with intrigue and complexity, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've uncovered his financial entanglements, witnessed his political maneuvering, and analyzed his foreign policy decisions, and it's clear that all of these actions have sparked serious concerns, not only about his true motivations, but also about the potential consequences for the U.S. and the world at large.
And the most unsettling part is, this story's not over. It's still unfolding, with new developments popping up all the time. So as we wrap up our deep dive, I think it's crucial to consider the long-term implications of this tangled relationship. What's in store for U.S.-Russia relations, and how might Trump's actions continue to shape the global landscape?
Well, predicting the future with absolute certainty is impossible, of course. But by carefully examining current trends, considering historical precedents, and exploring potential scenarios, we can gain valuable insights into what might lie ahead. One of the most prevalent concerns right now is the potential impact on U.S. foreign policy.
Trump's approach to foreign policy has been a real departure from the norm, a sharp break from decades of bipartisan consensus.
That's for sure. He's shown a great deal with skepticism towards those long-standing alliances, favoring bilateral deals over multilateral agreements, and embracing a very transactional view of international relations.
And that's caused a lot of friction with key allies in both Europe and Asia. They're starting to question the reliability of the U.S. as a global partner.
There's a lot of uncertainty now, and unfortunately, that uncertainty stemming from Trump's actions has created an opening for other players, like Russia and China, to step in and assert themselves more forcefully on the world stage.
They're not wasting any time, are they? They're actively filling the void left by the U.S., expanding their influence in regions that were once considered solidly within the American sphere.
It's a noticeable shift in the balance of power, one that could have significant repercussions for global stability and security. And we can't overlook the future of democracy and democratic institutions worldwide.
That's a big one. Trump's attacks on the media, his seeming disregard for the rule of law, and his apparent affinity for authoritarian leaders have definitely raised concerns about the health of democracy, not just in the U.S., but globally.
He's emboldened autocrats around the world. They see an opportunity now to chip away at democratic norms and consolidate their own power.
It's almost like they're taking cues from him.
It does seem that way. They feel emboldened by the perception that the U.S., the traditional champion of democracy, is no longer committed to promoting and defending democratic values.
And if democracy erodes in the U.S., it'll send shockwaves across the globe.
No doubt about it. It would weaken the international community's ability to tackle those shared challenges like climate change, global pandemics, you name it. It would make the world a much more dangerous and unpredictable place.
And then there are the economic implications of Trump's actions, which can't be ignored.
Those are significant. His protectionist trade policies, his laser focus on bilateral deals, and his often unpredictable behavior have disrupted those established global trade flows, created a lot of uncertainty for businesses worldwide.
It's like he's thrown a wrench into the gears of global trade.
Exactly. His approach to economic relations has alienated long-standing trading partners and led to trade wars that have harmed businesses and consumers alike. No one wins in a trade war.
And his relationship with Russia specifically, it raises those concerns about economic dependence.
That's a valid concern. Russia has a long history of using its economic leverage to achieve political goals, and Trump's close ties with the Russian government, well, they could make the U.S. susceptible to economic pressure from Moscow.
That could have serious consequences for American businesses and workers. They could find themselves caught in the crossfire of these geopolitical maneuvers. And the average person listening might be wondering how these global shifts could affect their day-to-day lives.
That's a question we should all be asking. The erosion of democracy, the rise of authoritarianism, the instability of global markets, all of these can have very real impacts on our personal freedoms, our economic security, even our physical safety.
It's easy to feel disconnected from these global issues, but we live in an increasingly interconnected world. Events happening on one side of the planet can quickly ripple outward and affect us all.
Exactly. Economic downturns, political instability, conflicts, they can spread rapidly and disrupt our lives in ways we might not expect.
It's a reminder that we need to stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and most importantly, hold our leaders accountable for their actions.
I couldn't agree more. The choices our leaders make today will have a profound impact on the world we live in tomorrow.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways. Donald Trump's relationship with Russia is a complex, multifaceted story with far-reaching implications. His financial entanglements, his political maneuvering, his foreign policy decisions, they've all woven together a web of intrigue that demands our attention.
The potential consequences of his action are significant, and we must remain vigilant. We need to keep a close eye on the situation and hold our leaders accountable for their choices.
The future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the decisions we make today. Thank you for joining us as we explore the depths of Donald Trump's relationship with Russia. We encourage you to continue exploring these crucial issues, seek out diverse viewpoints, and engage in those thoughtful discussions about the challenges our world is facing. It's up to all of us to shape the future we want to see.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.